Many people have different views on how old our planet is.
But how old does the Bible say it is?
Stay tuned to find answers.
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live, the program that reveals answers to tough questions about science and the Bible. Now, on today's show, we're going to talk about what the Bible says about the age of the earth. And many people in the church, they feel that this is a side issue. This isn't important. There's many other things that we need to be concerned about.
Right. I hope by the end of this show that the viewers will come to realize that this isn't a side issue. It's actually a critical issue, and maybe people might not understand that. So if you're just tuning in, you might want to hang out to the end of the show, because really what we're talking about is how not only just the age of the earth, but how we interpret Scripture throughout the Bible, and it even links directly to the gospel message, which I would assume most Christians would say would be the most vital message that the Bible contains.
That's right. Throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus, we read about Jesus saying things like, "It is written," and "Have you not read?" Now, when he's saying that, he's referring to the Old Testament. The Scriptures at the time of the New Testament. When all the apostles were quoting from the Scriptures were the Old Testament, which of course includes the creation account.
That's right.
So how we understand the Old Testament is critical, actually.
That's
right.
right.
Jesus and the apostles took it as real history in those sections that are history. It's critical how we understand that.
It's interesting too, because a lot of times when Jesus was criticizing people, he usually reserved that for the religious leaders, the people that supposedly knew his word very well, and he'd say things like, "Have you not read?" And I mean, that was a pretty hard comment to a group of religious leaders who supposedly knew their Bible very well. That was a bit of an insult, actually. I heard some of these people could recite Deuteronomy off by heart.
Yeah, I don't know too many people who can do that today.
No, not today.
No, obviously how we understand Scripture is critical in this area. We're determining the age of the earth, using Scripture and so on. I think next week we're going to talk about what science says about the age of the earth. But today, what Scripture says. And obviously it's important how we understand the Bible, and if we look at how Jesus and the apostles took it, we need to take it the same way that they did, and that's what we're going to do on today's show.
Normally, when an animal dies, it decays quickly. The skin decays and the bones fall apart or disarticulate. Finding fossilized soft tissue, such as skin, implies very rapid burial before it decayed. Describing a duck-billed dinosaur unearthed in South Dakota, one researcher said, "You can see the individual scales. Because of the presence of skin and the complete articulation of the animal, it was obviously not killed, and it was obviously not scavenged." A worldwide flood would rapidly bury animals, and rapidly buried animals, not buried slowly, are exactly what we see in the fossil record.
Creation Ministries international staff, many from a wide variety of scientific disciplines, have produced thousands of articles now available in a massive online database. www.creationontheweb.org has grown to become the world's most powerful internet resource on the creation evolution issue. There are more than 5,000 articles already online, and new articles are added daily. Some of the topics covered include the feasibility of Noah's Ark and the evidence for a global flood, the age of the earth from both the Bible and science, scientific arguments against the Big Bang and models that explain observations in astronomy within a young Earth time frame, recent discoveries that support dinosaurs fitting with biblical history, and many, many more topics. These thousands of articles are available for free 24 hours a day to anyone on Earth with an internet connection. One of the main reasons that CMI built this website is to strengthen the faith of Christians. Genesis is one of the most attacked areas of the Bible. CreationOnTheWeb.org provides logical, scientifically accurate counterattacks in this area. As 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5 says, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. Got questions? Get answers at creationontheweb.org.
If we evolved from apes, why are there still apes today? This common creationist argument misrepresents what evolutionists believe. They don't believe that we descended from apes, but that apes and humans share a common ancestor. When defending our faith, it's important for Christians to clearly understand the arguments we try to refute. A better argument can be made by pointing out that the theory of human evolution requires transitional forms, but not one has stood the test of honest, rigorous investigation. All are best understood to be from either an extinct ape or an extinct human.
Well, the Bible's pretty clear that the age of the earth is not millions of years old. I think if you just open up your Bible and you start reading it plainly without getting any information from outside of what Scripture actually says, I believe that the Bible says that the earth is fairly young.
Yeah, most people I think would agree with that. Even Christians who don't believe that the Bible has anything to say about a young earth, they would say that, okay, it's fairly clear, as you just said, that you don't see the word, for example, millions of years in there anywhere.
Right.
You see the word days, and you see year, and so on. This guy lived for so long, and the genealogies, and so on. So I think we can say that it's fairly clear, and I think that's not too controversial, that it doesn't support the notion of the great antiquity of the earth or the universe.
Right. So if you go from like today back to, let's say, when Jesus was born, you're looking at 2007 years or, or so.
Well, somewhere around there.
Yeah. And you go from of course, Jesus' time to, let's say, Abram, right? You're looking at
get back to, well, Abraham lived, if you want to get a ballpark figure for the age of the earth, I mean, you just look at the genealogies, and Abraham lived, born right around 2000 BC, and then it's 2009 years between the birth of Adam and the birth of Abraham. You get that from the genealogies,
because you can actually add up the chronologies and stuff like that. So it's pretty easy to, like you said, that most people would say, you don't really see millions of years right in the text. It's from outside of the text that those concepts have come from.
And not everybody, of course, believes that the genealogies are a good indication of when creation occurred and so on. So the notions of millions of years of the great antiquity of the earth, they come from outside the Scripture. That's the point.
Right. Now, most people believe in millions of years because of concepts like, the geologic column.
Right.
That's how I believed. I didn't grow up in the church.
The rocks and fossils, that's where the idea came from.
Right. They would show me diagrams of rock layers, and of course they'd have ages, corresponding to certain times and periods. And of course, what they were really trying to say is that, one type of creature has evolved into other types of creatures over time, so we can see these layers, and that was an indication of these dead things in there, that it supposedly evolved from one life form into another over vast periods of time. This was fact. You had to accept millions of years.
I think we need to explore that a little bit and just show the reason why we can't accept the millions of years is exactly because of what you just mentioned.
Right.
The things that we see in the fossil record, it's not just a bunch of dead things, but we see all kinds of things in the fossil record that are bad.
Right.
Cancerous tumors, for example, discovered in dinosaurs a few years back, written up in Creation magazine.
Right.
All kinds of other things. Diseases. There's so many diseases in the fossil record that there's an entire branch of science called paleopathology.
Right.
I think we've already talked about this on a previous show. So the fossil record is not very good. I mean, by anyone's definition, there's all kinds of bad things in the fossil record.
Not very good, as in they don't show a history of really positive things, we would say. We can see cancer, we can see death, and all those types of things. So really, biblically, if you were going to, and we did talk about this before, if you were going to say, well, where did actual death come from? When you open the Scripture, you'd say that, okay, well, death is a result of man's sin. That's why there's the bad things that we see. And so if you're believing in millions of years, then what you have to try to do is, because you can't really put it after Adam's sin, because you've got those genealogies there. You can't really fit millions of years.
Millions of years won't fit there.
They don't fit there. So what you've got to say is it happened before, but as soon as you do that, you've accepted all those things you talked about. Cancer, fossil thorns, death, bloodshed. We can see carnivorous activity in the fossil record. And you've got to say that that happened before God declared His completed creation very good.
Yeah, that was what, about 6,000 years ago? Somewhere in that neck of the woods, God declared His completed creation very good.
Right.
But the fossil record couldn't have already been in place at that time. How could God call things like cancer and death and bloodshed and all that very good? Doesn't make any sense. And if that were the case, and God would call that very good, that's not the kind of God that I'd be inclined to worship. Right. To be quite honest.
Right, and we've seen many atheists say things like that.
Yes,
well, the world we see around us today, if God created this, I wouldn't want to worship that God. Not realizing that, no, this is a corrupted world. Now, as creationists, and we're going to talk about this on another show, we would believe the fossil record got laid down, or a good proportion of it got laid down in the Great Flood as recorded in the Bible. And that's where what would make sense. You'd have the rock layers, you'd have dead things in there, and it would make sense because it's death after sin.
That's right.
But that's a big stumbling block if you're a Christian and you have said, okay, we're going to accept millions of years and I've got death before sin. Because this kind of determines how we're going to look about all of Scripture, isn't it?
That's right.
I mean, if I'm going to look at one portion of the Bible and say, well, my geology teacher said this, so I'm going to believe his interpretation of the rock layers. Oh, now I've got to change what I believe the Bible says. You're not taking the information from inside the Bible, you're taking it from outside. For example, let's take something in the New Testament. How about Jesus walking on water? I mean, we've never seen an example of someone, at least not like liquid water. You can go across the ice, but we haven't seen that. So if we've set up a scientific experiment to see if men could walk on water, they can't.
Obviously not, no.
And so then we say, well, okay, well then we're going to go look in the Bible and say, well, it says here Jesus walked on water, so we're going to reinterpret that. That, I don't think most Christians would do that.
I mean, so it becomes an issue of what place in your thinking are you going to give to Scripture?
What authority?
It's the authority of the Bible.
Right.
It's back to the same argument. And really, creation evolution for Christians, it really is a matter of the authority of Scripture. Where are you going to place it?
Right.
Are you going to allow outside ideas, the interpretations of some scientists, not all, some scientists, most of the scientists, evolutionists, go with their interpretations of the data, and they are interpretations, or are you going to say, well, this is what Scripture says, very plainly, and it's written as history, and we're going to go with that. And even if in some areas we don't have answers, how did this happen particularly? How did Jesus walk on water? How did all these different things? Science says something very, very different. I mean, people don't walk on water. Virgins don't conceive. A few loaves and fish don't feed 5,000 people. This is scientific fact. And yet the Bible says there are miracles. There is the supernatural. So what place are you going to give that?
I had this discussion with a young man when I was speaking one time, and he came up afterwards and he says, well, I just can't accept the fact that I'm supposed to read the Bible and everything in there is supposed to be accurate. And I said, well, you've got a big challenge now, because how do you then, because he professed himself to be a Christian, he had accepted Christ's sacrificial death as a payment of his sins. I said, where do you get those ideas? Well, they're in the Bible. I said, well, how do you therefore, know which part of the Bible to choose? And I'll tell you something. When I wasn't a Christian, this was a big bone I used to pick with people, because I used to say, I used to say they were cherry picking the Bible. Oh, you like this part? Well, what about this part?
Right. It's like a big smorgasbord. You take what you like and throw the rest away.
Right. And it seemed very obvious to me that that's not logical thinking. It's either the whole thing or it's nothing. Because then, if errors have crept into the Bible and it's not really the Word of God, and he hasn't laid it out, then how do you tell what's right and what's wrong? So he was saying, well, you have to believe in millions of years. Science has proven it, and this was what he was saying to me.
It's the same old argument. Science has proven it.
Yeah, and you said the virgin birth. I said, well, has science proven that virgins can give birth? And he sort of stopped for a second and he started thinking about that, and I see, here's your problem.
I mean, if that's your hermeneutic, if that's your method of interpreting Scripture, whenever science says something different than the Bible, you go with science. I mean, there has to be room for the miraculous, and also
right. And you said the word science, but really what you're saying is an interpretation of science, right? Because we talked about before the fact. If you get a fossil, you find a dead fish in a piece of rock, that's a fact.
Right.
There used to be a fish, now it's dead, buried in a rock, but how it got there, that's an interpretation. How long ago it got there, that's an interpretation. Right. You weren't there to see the fish die.
How old is the earth? How do we know these things? What do we give the authority in that area? Do we go with science in that area when we're talking about the age of the earth? Or do we go with what Scripture says? Right. And I mean, the Scripture doesn't say the earth is 6,000 years old, but we can deduce that logically. And that's what we want to do on this show, just talking about the age of the earth from what the Bible says. Right.
Because it definitely links to the gospel message. And I would hope that to most Christians watching, that you would consider, that central message, Christ coming and dying on a cross to pay for sins. That is the most central and important issue for every Christian, and it links directly to that. So that's what we're going to be talking about.
That's good.
Richard Lewontin, an evolutionary biologist at Harvard University, once said, "It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and set of concepts that produce material explanations. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." Here is a clear admission of the censoring of any evidence for creation. To read more than 5,000 articles of censored information, go to www.creationontheweb.org.
When Dr. Carl Whelan started Creation magazine in his home in 1978, little did he realize that today it would reach into some 140 countries all around the world and have such a huge impact in so many lives. This unique 56-page, full-color family magazine refutes evolution and gives God the glory for the amazing creation we see all around us. It gives you the answers to defend your faith and uphold the true history of the world found in Genesis. Creation magazine is an essential tool for anyone wanting to immunize their family against the anti-biblical worldviews bombarding us from all sides. With no paid advertising, every page in Creation magazine is full of powerful articles, ammunition to intelligently discuss nature, history, science, the Bible, and related subjects. Although written for lay people, every effort is made to ensure that the content is technically accurate so that even experts are satisfied. And young children look forward to the section written especially for them. The exciting articles also provide great witnessing material that you won't find anywhere else. Many have come to faith in Christ because of subscribers sharing this magazine with them. So subscribing not only boosts your faith, it enables you to get biblical truth into your community in a special way. Subscribe today and have it delivered to your home every 3 months. Visit www.creationontheweb.com for subscription information or call the CMI office nearest you.
Now, even if you wanted to blend somehow the millions of years in with the Bible and perhaps to stretch out Genesis 1, it still doesn't fit. Even if you stretch out Genesis 1, there's some logical inconsistencies there, or some time inconsistencies, rather. If you look at this first example here, Genesis says that land plants came first and then fish, but evolution says that fish preceded land plants by hundreds of millions of years.
Right.
Got a problem. In this second example here, fish and birds are created on the same day, according to the Bible, but evolution says they're separated by hundreds of millions of years. Right. Again, there's a problem. In Genesis, it says that the earth was created first, and then came the sun, moon, and stars.
Right.
The Big Bang, right?
Yeah.
But the Big Bang says the stars and the sun were first, and then the earth came afterwards.
Right.
According to the Big Bang. Genesis says exactly the opposite.
Right.
According to Genesis, the earth was initially a universal ocean, and then dry land appeared on day 3 after the water.
Right.
But again, the Big Bang, evolution, has it exactly the other way around.
Right. Now I've used examples like this when I'm speaking, of course, and typically if I get a negative reaction, it's like, yeah, well, you're just being too picky. You're just being too fussy. You know, it's kind of the same and stuff like that. But what I like to show them is, you know, we don't do that with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Right? We don't typically say, well, the resurrection, well, you know.
Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. It's not important what you think.
Right, and of course people get shocked at that because, you know, I call many times people, you know, New Testament Christians. They're not really seeing the link between the New Testament and the Old Testament. Like you said before, when Jesus and the disciples were quoting Scripture, what were they quoting? They were quoting the Old Testament. The New Testament didn't exist. They were part of that record.
That's right. And one of those verses, Mark 10, verse 6, there in the New Testament.
Right.
But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female.
Right.
Now think about the two time scales. You've got the evolutionary time scale of billions of years before man ever comes on the scene. Then he wasn't created at the beginning of creation.
Right.
If God somehow used evolution, if the evolutionary time scale of billions of years
You've got
is correct,
this huge time span, and
man
then
appears near the end, actually, on that time scale.
Right. But
if
biblically,
the biblical time scale, right, he's right there at the beginning.
right. So that obviously Jesus believed in a literal or plain reading of his own word.
Straightforward that it was historical. Yes, of course.
Because of course he is God, so he wrote everything.
He is the creator. In the beginning
right.
was the Word, and the Word was there, and through
That's
him
right.
nothing was made that was made.
Now, what's interesting is, you know, Christians who believe in millions of years actually admit that the ideas come from outside of Scripture.
And maybe we want to preface this section but with a bit of a disclaimer. We've
Right.
got some quotes coming up from theologians. These are conservative theologians,
Right.
Bible professors, and so on. And what we want to do here is show you how they don't believe in millions of years. None of these guys believe in a young creation, a young world.
Right.
They all believe in millions of years. But look what they admit.
Right.
They're Bible scholars. Look what they admit in some of these passages here.
Right.
Davis Young, professor at Calvin College, if geological facts unequivocally require such an interpretation to harmonize the Bible with nature, then science must be allowed to modify our exegesis of Scripture.
Wow. That's huge. You know, to me, that's huge to hear a Christian say, well, if science has proven something, then we must modify what Scripture
And we
actually
talked
says.
about that fallacy just a few moments ago.
Right.
Here's another one here. This is Paddle Pun from Wheaton College. It is apparent that the most straightforward understanding of the Genesis record, notice what he admits, without
Right.
regard to all of the hermeneutical considerations suggested by science, is that God created heaven and earth in 6 solar days, that man was created in the 6th day, that death and chaos entered the world after the fall of Adam and Eve, and that all of the fossils were the result of the catastrophic universal deluge which spared only Noah's family and the animals therewith.
So he's just admitted that this is the plain reading of Scripture.
Right.
Anybody can read it and come to that conclusion.
And it seems to suggest recent creation in 6 literal days followed by a global flood.
Right.
That's what he's saying. If you take it straightforwardly, it's apparent that the most straightforward understanding, he says.
Right. But he doesn't believe that.
No.
He believes in millions of years, and he's accepted basically an evolutionary explanation of rock layers and time scale.
That time scale, that evolutionary time scale.
Right.
Here's another one here. This is Charles Hodge in Systematic Theology. It is, of course, admitted that taking this account by itself, it would be most natural to understand the word, he's talking about the word day in Genesis, in its ordinary sense. But if that sense brings the Mosaic account into conflicts with facts, and he's talking about interpretations in science, and another sense avoids such conflict, then it is obligatory on us to adopt the other.
Right. Now, this is interesting because what he's saying is, okay, if these facts, or he doesn't realize that it's an interpretation of facts, says that, you know, this is the facts. We're gonna you know, take an interpretation of Scripture that's different. But you know, oftentimes secular interpretations of these facts actually change. We've seen that. We've seen it in science textbooks. You can say, well, you know, I think the Earth has gotten has basically doubled in age about every 20 years since the 1930s.
Yes,
I mean, it was
just
1.2 billion years, billion years old.
Just a couple of weeks ago, they were saying that they have to revise the age of the universe now.
Right.
Again, so whose facts are you going to go with? There's different facts. And
right.
So it's a good thing the Bible never changes.
That's right. But all three of these theologians, and these are people that love God, love His Word. But what's happened is because they accepted that one concept. Oh, well, maybe the earth is millions of years old, and they even admit, well, the Bible seems to indicate that, but we're gonna accept that anyway and see if it can fit with what the Bible says.
It's just interesting to me seeing their hermeneutic in Genesis.
Right.
You know, in the rest of Scripture, you interpret Scripture with Scripture, as of course we should.
As plainly written.
As plainly written. You take, if it's a parable, you take it as parable. If it's prose or poetry or whatever it is. But in Genesis, it's written as history. But oh, wait a minute.
Right.
We're not going to take it as history. It must be something else. It must be just an allegory or a spiritual story or something like that. Because why? Because of something in the text? No. Because of outside ideas.
Right. And many times when I'm talking to people about this issue, it's the fact that you have death occurring before Adam sinned. That really, when you see the lights go on, they go, oh yeah. You know, and then they start to realize, yeah, that's what, you know, the gospel message hinges on. That's why Jesus came, to pay, you know, he's the last Adam, to pay back the penalty of the first Adam. So, you know, we just want to really be careful about how we're looking at Scripture, and that's why we know this isn't a side issue. As a matter of fact, we've got a quote here from, I guess you'd call it a hostile witness.
He's not a Christian.
Right, this is Professor James Barr, and he's a Hebrew scholar and Oriel professor of the interpretation of Holy Scriptures at Oxford University. So this is a fellow who knows the Hebrew language very, very, very well. And he was actually asked, now he doesn't believe the Bible's true, he just studies it and can tell you what it says. And he was asked these questions, you know, what does Genesis actually say? And this is his quote. As far as I know, there's no professor of Hebrew or Old Testament at any world-class university, a little bit of intellectual superiority there, who does not believe that the writers of Genesis 1 through 11 intended to convey to their readers the idea that creation took place in a series of 6 days, which were the same as the days of 24 hours which we now experience, and that the figures contained in the Genesis genealogies provided by a simple addition, a chronology from the beginning of the world up to the later stages in the biblical story. And he also says, Noah's flood was understood to be worldwide and extinguished all human and all animal life except for those in the ark. So again, he doesn't believe that, but he can tell you this is what the Hebrew language says.
As a Hebrew expert.
That's right.
He's saying that this is what the language says. It's
right.
not a myth, it's not an allegory. This is what the language plainly says.
You can't modify it, is basically what he's saying.
Yes.
So, you know, we use that quote because it's someone with he doesn't have any, I guess, bias, or he's not trying to make Scripture say something that perhaps it doesn't. He's just saying, no, this is just what it says.
But this belief in millions of years, it's essential to evolution.
Right.
I mean, you know, I don't really care if God created, you know, 6,000 years ago or 6 billion years ago.
Right.
The point is that God created, and what does the Bible say? Ultimately, that's the sense.
Right.
But just understand what I'm saying. That it doesn't really matter. God could have done it millions of years ago. He could have done it 6,000 years ago.
As a matter of fact, why do you even take 6 days?
So why do you take 6 days? Yeah, that argument all comes back to what the Bible says. Of course, they did do it recently. But for evolutionists, they don't have that flexibility. We don't really either. But what I mean is they need millions of years.
Right.
They absolutely need them for their story to make sense.
6,000 years is not enough time for evolution to have occurred.
Right.
So it's critical that they have it in order for their
If you look at even Jewish historians, Josephus, he wrote Antiquities of the Jews.
We'll talk about that more in the next
That's right, we'll be back.
If God didn't create the sun until day 4, how could each of the previous 3 days have been real days? Although we are not told what the light source was, the Bible says that God created the earth and light on the first day. Thus, we can deduce that on the first 3 days, the earth was already rotating in space relative to God's created light, enabling a day-night cycle. In the book of Revelation, we read that in the future new heavens and earth there will once again be no need for sun.
Many people think the Earth is billions of years old, but have you ever wondered exactly how scientists date rocks? In his video, Rocks and Ages, Do They Hide Millions of Years?, Dr. Emil Silvestru explains the assumptions that govern what geologists pretend to see in the rock record. A biblical model based on the cataclysmic flood makes much more sense of the rocks we find today. Emil Silvestro investigates geological anomalies that secular scientists avoid because they conflict with the idea of evolution. Imagine a tree fossilized in layers of rock that should have been separated by millions of years, yet the tree stayed intact. And what about fossilized pollen found in rocks that, according to evolutionary timelines, predate this type of complex life form? Dr. Silvestro explains evidences and shows how they support the Bible's teaching of a young Earth.
Well, each week we like to talk about some things that have come along in the news that pertain to creation, evolution, Genesis, the things our ministry discuss. And of course, this was a big headline all across all the news channels. This was a story. It said, James Cameron finds Jesus. And I'll just read you the article. I'm sure most people have heard about this, most Christians anyway. It says, a new documentary is stirring up the next Da Vinci Code controversy. The 10 ancient ossuaries caskets used to store bones may include that of Jesus and his family. Goes on, says, according to a press release issued from the Discovery Channel, the documentary, The Last Tomb of Jesus, produced by Oscar-winning director James Cameron, discovered the tomb in a suburb of Jerusalem in 1980. One of the caskets bears the title Judah, son of Jesus, suggesting that the Christian Savior may have had a son. This contradicts the beliefs that Jesus was resurrected and ascended into heaven, and that he did not have a family. And then it says, in 1996, the BBC aired a short documentary on the same subject, and archaeologists challenged the claims, saying that the idea fails to hold by archaeological standards, but makes for profitable television. So
right.
I've heard many people commenting on this story and so on and so forth. What was interesting from this news report, this was on an internet site, and you had an opportunity to email some comments or questions or whatever to it, and it said, do you think it's possible that James Cameron discovered the skeleton of Jesus? It says, write to us, and so on and so forth.
Right.
What I found was interesting, and I'll read you some of the email responses that came in to that article. And just so we can discuss it, because really we're talking about the authority of the Word of God. What does the Bible clearly say, and so on and so forth. This was from Mike, and he wrote, and he said, I'm a Christian, and I really hope it's true. He says he really hopes it's true that they've found Jesus' tomb. And he says, because I'd like to learn as much about Jesus as possible. I don't know why it would bother any Christian to discover that Jesus had a body that was human and had a family just like most of us do. To know that Jesus had descendants that walk among us should fill us with happiness, and we should be honored to be the first generation of Christians to be able to give his remains the proper respect. If this discovery passes the scientific test, it should fill us with joy, not with anger, fear, or denial. Now, there were actually several comments similar to this that were emailed in from people professing to be Christians that said, oh, this wouldn't bother me at all.
Yes, well, I mean, nowadays you get people professing to be Christians who are just all over the map.
Right.
And
but even if Mike is sincere that he's a Christian, there's a major challenge here. Obviously, in the article itself, it says that this contradicts the beliefs that Jesus was resurrected and ascended into heaven.
yes, of course, it would, obviously.
I mean, this is the whole reason why it's controversial, right? I mean, it's controversial. This is what we're going to do. We're going to make a movie and say we've discovered Jesus' bones. Well, if he ascended into heaven, if he is truly God,
there ain't no bones to discover.
That's right. But here I'm seeing an amazing amount, basically, of biblical illiteracy with Christians or people who profess to be Christians, because obviously this would be a huge challenge if this was actual truth. Now, of course,
yes,
it's been debunked many times, but still, it's amazing how people are reacting. Now, here's from Guy, and another person who wrote in, and he's not a Christian. And this is what he says. Yes, I think it's possible that Cameron discovered what many of us already knew. Jesus was just a man and not a God. Now we will get to see the power of the Christian church as it does everything possible to reinforce faith and deny any threat of the real truth uncovered by science. This may not be the actual remains of Jesus, his wife, or his child, but it won't matter. Now the toughest battle to date, begins between science and faith.
Wow, so here's someone writing in, and they've got that same perception that so many in the scientific community have. Well, I'm a scientist, and then there's faith.
Right.
And never the two shall meet, kind of thing. And
right.
You can't reconcile the two. They don't fit together at all, and yet both creation and evolution are faith positions. They both involve science,
right,
but they're both faith positions. And here we've got something that happened in the past.
Right.
These bone boxes were buried. They have some bones in them. And so we need to come up with a story to explain the data that exists in the present.
That's
the
right.
Bone box.
Exactly. So it's a faith versus faith position. Now,
right.
We're in a great position as Christians because we've got a recorded, written word of the one who was there. Right? There was no one around, 4.5 billion years ago to see anything happen.
That's right, and that's the great advantage that we have as Christians.
Right.
The evolutionists, or James Cameron in this case in the documentary,
yeah.
they have things in the present,
yeah.
Those bones and the inscriptions on the boxes, and they need to piece together what happened in the past. Are those really Jesus' bones that went into the box? Whose bones went into the box, really?
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. But if there had been someone there on site years ago, however long ago this happened,
yeah.
And it said, okay, it was this person whose bones went into whose body went into the box,
right.
the bones went into the box, I suppose. And if there was an eyewitness account and written documentation,
right.
that would be a far, far superior record of the truth, of what actually happened. We're trying to determine the truth. James Cameron is trying to determine the truth. And
so if we're trying to figure out whether President Lincoln actually existed in time, what would we do? We'd go to some old documents and see if there was any record of his existence and so on and so forth. And many times I get people saying, well, you can't really trust the Bible. It's an old book. We don't know who wrote it and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting that there are many ancient manuscripts that people trust implicitly. They're being taught in school. This person said this person said that. I've actually got a list here of a couple of them. And really, when people are looking at the reliability of an ancient manuscript, there are actual tests that historians use to determine, is it accurate or not?
Right.
And they have criteria. They say, okay, what's the work? When was it written? When was, what was the date when it was supposed to be written? And then what's the earliest copy we have from when it was written? Obviously, if something happened here and, 2,000 years later, it was written about, well, there's been a huge time gap. There may be some inaccuracies. What's the earliest copy we have? Then the time span between different copies, because we may have several copies. And we want to see if those copies change over time, too. We see if there's any corruption.
Right.
And then how many copies do we have? Here's just some quick examples. If you take the work of Caesar, written in 100 to 44 BC, the earliest copy we have is AD 900. That's about a 1,000-year time span. The number of copies we have is 10. Okay, it's considered quite accurate. Here's Plato. There's the accuracy there. There's Homer's Iliad, which is the up to next to the New Testament, the most accurate historical manuscript. And there's the New Testament, 24,000 copies of it.
So that when you have a historical record like that, it is far, far superior to any kind of guessing game that you have in the present about a bone box that's been discovered. The written record is far, far superior in this case.
Does the Bible give clues as to how old the earth is? In Mark 10, verse 6, Jesus said, "But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female." But if the universe is billions of years old, then Jesus' statement is false because people did not arrive at the beginning but close to the end. The chronogenealogies in Genesis 5 and 11 document that there was 2009 years between the creation of Adam and the birth of Abraham. Since Abraham lived close to 2000 BC, this gives a date for the creation week of around 4000 BC.
The Great Turning Point. There are many people in the church today who think that young earth creationism is a fairly recent invention, popularized by fundamentalist Christians in the mid-20th century. Is this view correct? Scholar Dr. Terry Mortensen reveals fascinating original research that documents a different story. great attention to detail, this book documents the early 19th century origin of the idea of millions of years and the Christian men who opposed this idea. This book, suitable for ages 14 and up, reveals the philosophical underpinnings of the debate surrounding the age of the earth and its implications regarding the truth of the Bible. Learn why this issue is central to the creation-evolution debate and how most of the originators of the idea of long ages were actually hostile to Christianity.
We're talking about the age of the earth and what the Bible says about the age of the earth, and the biggest indicator and the superiority of that written record, that eyewitness record from the past, over and above anything that we could measure today or rates of anything changing or whatever. The main thing that we want to look at is the genealogies in Genesis 5 and Genesis 11, actually properly called chronogenealogies because they have the time in there as well. They're not like the genealogies in Matthew and Luke. They have the time in there. This guy lived so long and he had a son, and this guy lived so long and he had a son. Right. So we know the exact year from Adam, for example, to Abraham, 2009 years. But there are people that say there were gaps. See, you see, there's gaps in those genealogies. Right. And maybe one guy could have been the grandfather or great-grandfather, and there could be all kinds of other people in there. Right. There are no gaps. That's the bottom line. I think we can say that right up front. Yeah. Even Josephus, the Jewish historian Josephus, writing a long time ago in I think the first century, in his Antiquities of the Jews, he also presents a chronology, and many people have built chronologies. James Ussher comes to mind. Yeah. Chronology, we got creation date back to 4004 BC. Right. He's probably in the ballpark somewhere. Yeah. Josephus did a chronology. Many people, I think Isaac Newton did a chronology of when did creation start. Right. Josephus presents a chronology that had no gaps in the genealogies. Right, which indicates that the Jews of the time didn't see any gaps in there either. These gaps have been talked about, or supposed proposed gaps, because people are trying to say that you can't just know what the age of the earth is and you can't know it accurately. But at the time, there didn't seem to be any gaps. See, this is an idea, again, that came after, quite recently actually, the last couple hundred years, this belief in millions of years, and maybe we've got to modify the scripture and stuff like that. Yeah, we've got to put them in somewhere, so maybe there's gaps in the genealogies. But when you look back in history, you don't really see that. Another problem is, where do you insert the gaps? In Genesis 5 and Genesis 11. Where could they plausibly be inserted? For example, Seth is definitely a direct son of Adam and Eve. Right. As seen in the replacement for Abel. Abel was killed by Cain. Seth was the replacement. So he's definitely not, there's no gap there. Right. Enosh must have been a son of Seth because Seth named him. Right. So he's a son of Seth. Enoch, and Jude 14 says, Enoch was the seventh from Adam, which indicates that a straightforward father-to-son relationship from Adam to Enoch was a seventh from Adam. Noah, Lamech named him, so Lamech must be his father, not just an ancestor. And you have these other examples. And so the genealogies in Genesis 5 and 11, in order to fit the millions of years in there, you can only do it in certain places. If you kind of want to look at it with, give it the squint test and put those millions of years in there somewhere. But you can only do it in certain places. But the biggest challenge, even if you did want to fit, or somehow you could do that, you would literally need thousands and thousands and thousands of insertions between these gaps. And then you got to ask yourself, why would God record His Word? I mean, there's a lot of those people listed in the Bible. They're just listed. We don't know anything about them. There's no stories about them. There's no teaching value in there. There's no... they're just like, well, this and this and this. And why would you put them in and then leave out thousands of other ones that presumably had about the same value as far as God, transmitting information to us, or for whatever reason? Why are they even in there? That's right. The genealogies completely fall apart. The purpose for them falls apart. Why have the genealogies in there? Right. If you have to put all these gaps in there. If we look at a timeline of the amount of time that Genesis takes up in history, we look at that biblical timeline. We had this in one of our creation magazines, September to November 2005. You can see it there. The real history, the timeline of the Bible. And by the way, you can download this from our website. This little chart here. It comes in a PDF form, and you can see there at the bottom how much time Genesis covers. The book of Genesis covers a massive amount of time in history.
Right.
The New Testament covers only an extremely small portion of time, just a few years.
Yeah.
Genesis covers a huge range of history. There was over 1,600 years before the flood. It covers a massive span of history, but it's all there.
It's interesting too that many people have not made a connection. You know, there's a direct connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament as far as the authority of Scripture, and Jesus actually talked about it himself. You know, he was often debating the Pharisees about different things and sort of teaching them and stuff. An interesting passage in John 5:46 and 47. And Jesus has just been kind of tearing a strip off them basically, and he gets to the end and he says this. He said, "If you'd believe Moses, you'd believe me, for he wrote about me. But since you don't believe what he wrote, how are you going to believe what I say?" This is a very interesting passage of Scripture to me, because he's saying, if you don't believe what Moses wrote, you're not going to believe what I say. And when you think about it, there's another passage of Scripture, you know, Lazarus and the rich man, and Lazarus is a poor man, and he dies, and he goes to be with Abraham, and the rich man dies, and he goes to hell. And he wants to get out, but he can't. And he actually pleads, and he says, well, go back and tell my brothers about this place. I don't want them to suffer what I've suffered. And the response is, they have Moses and the prophets, and if they don't believe them, they're not even going to believe it if a man rises from the dead.
Even if somebody kind of sounds like Scrooge and Charles Dickens there with, even if somebody rises from the dead, they're still not going to believe.
Right.
Why? Because they have the Scriptures. It goes back again and again and again. The Scriptures, the Scriptures, the Scriptures. Jesus said that in the passage we just talked about. Go back to the Scriptures.
It seems to be that you're going to have a tough time believing in Jesus if you don't believe what Moses wrote. I mean, you know, see, I believe this. God works through people. And I believe Satan works through people too. And I believe that, you know, what God records in His Word can't be broken. So to me, it seems obvious. If you can get people to disbelieve in Moses, they're not even going to believe in a resurrection. Now, what did Moses write? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Yeah. So what do those books contain? Well, they contain the creation account, the fall of man, the promise of a Messiah, right? That Jesus was going to come. Yeah. Talks about a worldwide flood, and talks about the law, talks about the Tower of Babel. All these things. I mean, if you were to go ask people in the culture today, your average person isn't a Christian, do you believe those accounts? Well, they don't. They also don't believe in Jesus, it seems, a lot of times. They don't believe in the historicity of what the Old Testament actually teaches about the beginning, and so they don't believe the New Testament accounts are real. Real either.
For the Christian, it's all about going back to Scripture.
Right.
So we take it as it's written, and we're just talking about various examples here of where Jesus said, you need to go back to the Scriptures.
Right.
Go back to, if you don't believe Moses, you're not going to believe me. And then that's a quote from Jesus. So go back to the Scriptures, back to the Scriptures. And that needs to be our perspective today. If we're looking at, well, how old is the earth? We need to take exactly that same perspective. Go back to the Scriptures, because it's a reliable eyewitness from someone who was there in the past.
Yeah.
And it's better than any kind of dating method or anything. And we're going to talk about that on the next show, actually.
Right. Now, a lot of people haven't really thought about it either, that the people who came up with the concept of millions of years, they weren't usually Bible-friendly people.
Right.
You know, concepts like millions of years have been derived from people like Charles Lyell and James Hutton. And anyway, Charles wrote the book Principles of Geology, Charles Lyell.
Yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah, and he stated in 1881 that his geological aim was to free science from Moses. Now, that's not a geological aim. That's a philosophical aim. He could directly see the link between the rock layers and the fossils in there. Most people believing that was laid down at the time, or most of it was laid down at the time of the Great Flood.
The flood, yeah.
And that's contained in one of the books that Moses wrote. And he said, well, we're going to free science from Moses. We're going to come up with a new interpretation of the rock layers, a new history. Is basically what he said.
To try and give people a reason for rejecting the Bible.
Right.
It's a very underhanded kind of aim there. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I can just tell people, growing up, not in the church, didn't go to youth group, didn't go to church and anything like that, I can tell you something, that compromise doesn't win people over. I was never impressed with the Christian who I would talk to and they would compromise. Well, you want me to believe this part, but what about this part over
Right.
here?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, too, that they would try to talk to me about Jesus, and I wanted to talk about Moses. And so the scriptures that I mentioned hold true. They wanted to talk to me about Jesus, and he was going to save me, and I needed to be saved from my sins. And I'd say, well, do you really believe that he got, Noah got 2 of every kind of animal on some ark? And I would talk to them about the books of Moses, and they wanted to talk to me about Jesus. There's a direct link here. So this is not a side issue.
Have you ever heard that your appendix is a useless vestigial organ left over from your evolutionary past? At one time, evolutionists believed there were more than 180 functionless structures in the human body. Today, virtually none. Even up to 2002, some dictionaries defined vestigial as relating to a body part that has become small and lost its use because of evolutionary change. Today, the appendix is recognized as a special part of our immune system. For details on this or any other topic on Creation Magazine Live, visit creationontheweb.org.
Finding answers to questions about the origins debate. Creation or evolution? When the results are in, which one is supported by scientific observations? Find out at creationontheweb.org. Creation scientists and researchers from around the world have contributed more than 5,000 articles, many of which appeared in leading creationist publications like Creation Magazine and the Journal of Creation over more than 30 years. A new daily front page article keeps web visitors informed about the latest breaking news in the creation-evolution debate. When news breaks about the latest evolutionary ape man, or some major supposed evidence for evolution, check out creationontheweb.org for a Christian creationist response. Each weekend, the website features a feedback article, a response to web visitors' email feedback. Often, the anti-creationist arguments in skeptics' emails are refuted in a detailed response by a CMI staff member. So in a very practical way, believers can see that the Bible, and particularly Genesis, can be defended against skeptics' arguments. The website includes an online store where you can browse through hundreds of the world's leading creationist books, DVDs, and related materials, all available to build up the faith of the believer. Got questions? Get answers at creationontheweb.org.
Well, we're here at the feedback section, and we try to do this every show where we give it a chance for people who have questions or comments about what we do in Creation Ministries, whether it's through the show or through our website or when we're out speaking, to give us some feedback. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, and maybe get some of your questions answered. We're talking about the age of the earth, and we had some feedback from a lady named Martine, and she said, I'm a Christian and I have been for some time. She says, I enjoy both the Creation, which Creation Magazine, which we produce, and the TJ, the technical journal, which is now the Journal of Creation, we call it. Right. And she said she enjoys both of those magazines. And then she said, however, I cringe sometimes when I read or hear speakers dogmatically say the biblical stance is that the earth is 7 or so thousand years old. Now, we should probably make a statement of how old we actually think the earth is, but anyway. She says, I know it seems that way, but I can't help thinking that if it is categorically proved or the evidence strongly suggests that the earth is much older, say millions of years old, that a lot of people will discard the more important things that the Bible talks about. She says, my suggestion is why not take the safer, less dogmatic stance and say something like, there's strong biblical support that suggests the age of the earth is 7 or so thousand years, but this should not be taken as a biblical doctrine or dogma or something like that. It says, I just wonder that the whole thing is going to crumble into a heap with a lot of people with it when one places the credibility of Scripture on such shaky doctrine as the age of the earth.
Okay. Well, we've already talked about why it's important, the millions of years,
right.
No death before sin, and so on. But it's just it's interesting that she says she cringes when she hears this, because again, there's that tendency, I think, in her thinking, and it used to be in my thinking the same. What if one day some scientist discovers proof positive that the universe really is billions of years old?
Right.
What if it happens? What if this? And I remember thinking as an evidentialist years ago. I'd be interested in this evidence, and this evidence, and this evidence. And then I'd get these creation evidences, and then I'd turn it on an evolutionary program on television, and I'd get some evolutionary evidences, and I'd be all scared. I'd be kind of like I'm hearing that in this testimony here, this feedback here.
So what you're saying, though, is you didn't understand the difference, that you weren't looking at different evidences. You were looking at the same evidence, but interpreted by two different people.
It's interpreted differently. Once I started thinking from a presuppositional or an axiomatic point of view, that fear completely subsided, and I recognized, oh yeah, they're going to interpret this in terms of millions of years, and that's what they're going to do and promote it on the show.
I thought it was interesting that it was said that if it is categorically proved, see, people need to understand something. You cannot prove millions of years because you have no way of going back in time. All you can do is make experiments in the present and try to see and make a guess at what happened in the past.
We're going to talk about that next week.
Right. Nobody was there to see it. So, or she even said, or the evidence strongly suggests. Well, the evidence only strongly suggests a big age of the earth if you interpret it through a concept of evolution.
So I've got a feedback here as well. This is from a Christian. He says, I'm consistently amazed at the tendency of Christians to put science over Scripture, but I know I shouldn't be. I too was once in the same position, this fellow says.
Right.
Teaching the long ages theory in Bible studies. So he was teaching Bible studies, millions of years for the earth. I'm now a firm believer in the literal nature of Genesis 1 to 11. Such a perspective actually enhances my understanding of science and provides much more opportunity to marvel at God's wisdom in creation and all we see around us. He says, I believe for Christians, it is the lack of submission to Scripture, really to all that Jesus said and did, including his crystal clear understanding of Genesis 1 to 11 as literal history.
Right.
I mean, amen. It looks like some of the materials that our ministry produces has, like in this fellow's life and also in my own life personally, I think in your life as well, you could say the same thing. It's that kind of information that ultimately we said, yeah, this is the way it is.
It allows me to go to my Bible when I'm reading the Bible and just read it and say, okay, if God's promised me that, if God's Word says that, then I can just trust it. Because, getting back to this, concept of, if they categorically prove that the earth, or it suggests that the earth's millions of years old, maybe we've got to reinterpret Scripture. But again, if let's take the virgin birth. If you want to categorically prove that virgins don't give birth, we could do a lot of experiments to show that that doesn't happen.
Obviously
so
not.
what do you do with that in the New Testament if you're going to be cringing, And I understand where the person's coming from. I guess, again, there are many people that are in that boat.
Used to be in that position ourselves.
Yeah.
So we've got another one here. Dinosaurs dating in the age of the earth. Let me get clear about your beliefs. How old do you believe the earth is? And how do you debunk carbon dating? Well, we're going to be talking about that shortly. Dinosaur bones have been dated based on the half-life of certain elements at millions of years. The earliest human remains found are nowhere near that old. Also, in the Bible, there's no reference to dinosaurs. I would think that a creature of such threat to life and sheer size would be mentioned, at least in passing. Perhaps I'm not familiar with the passage that clearly describes man walking amongst dinosaurs. Well, how about where it says in Genesis chapter 1 that God created land animals and man side by side.
Right.
And he talks about carbon dating. Again, we have to do a show on carbon dating.
Yeah, we do.
That's coming up. And these things, you look at certain rates of things like carbon-14 atoms, radioactive, they decay into nitrogen-14 after time, and you have to assume certain rates.
Right.
The Bible is still a much more accurate record of that history and a great place to go to find the age of the earth.